People don't really realize what the foot shape should be like. They don't realize that what they're doing to themselves each and every day is actively deforming themselves. So basically, we just try to backtrack and get them aware of that and get them on the right path, and they heal.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, whose favorite number is 17, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 103 of the Running For Real podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If this is your first episode, welcome. I am happy to have you here. If this is your 103rd episode of listening to the Running For Real podcast, I appreciate you and your loyalty. You are wonderful. Thank you so much. Last week, we had Christy Ashwandan on the show. Isn't that such a good name? Ashwandan. And wasn't that an interesting episode? Christy came on the show in 2017 as a journalist who was telling us about what is really going on with a lot of these issues that we see. And I had her back on to talk about her book last week, which is all about recovery. But wait. Not what you think. All about recovery, as in she went to all these gadgets and tools that we're told will help us recover. And she looked into all of them to give us her unbiased verdict on what she found, while also uncovering some interesting information we need to keep in mind about trusting scientific studies. It was a very interesting one. If you did miss it, go back and check that out, or make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you make sure in future all new episodes come straight to your phone or your podcast player. Now, today I have one that I honestly think might just blow your mind. Yep, it could really change your entire outlook very quickly. Today we're talking about feet. But wait, don't disappear on me. This is not just for people with feet problems. I'm actually someone who's really never really had major foot issues, touch wood. But Dr. Ray McClanahan has some serious knowledge to drop on us today. And this will show you why I have switched my running shoes, and I've changed a lot of things about my running life, which is very interesting. I don't want to give too much away, as this is seriously fascinating and I cannot wait to hear your thoughts on this episode. So on that note, let me know. I want you to send me an email, tag me in your social media on those shares. Let's have a chat about it in Superstars. However you would like to join in the conversation, let's do it, because I'm really interested to know what you think. Be sure to listen to all the way through to the end of this episode, as I will have a code for you to get free shipping at the end of this episode. So be sure to listen to that. Now, before I begin, I just want to take a moment to tell you about a few housekeeping things. Firstly, thank you so much to everyone who has supported me by purchasing a copy of my book, Overcoming Amenorrhea, Get Your Period Back, Get Your Life Back, and especially those of you who have left an Amazon review. Thank you. I have an exciting brand new sponsor for you to meet in just a second, but before I introduce you to them, will you do me a favor, please, and go fill out a quick survey about this podcast? I know, surveys are annoying. Delta drives me nuts with their constant need for surveys, but I'm actually doing this for your benefit. And yes, I am going to listen. I want to figure out what kind of guests you want to have, what kind of products and services I could reach out to sponsor this show, and things and people you actually want to hear from. It won't take long, but it will make both of our lives better, and this will make it a more enjoyable experience for you. So there's that. You can help me by going to the show notes and clicking on the link, or by visiting tinamuir.com/survey. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. Now let's go meet our brand new sponsor, Aftershocks. This episode is sponsored by Aftershocks, the award-winning headphone brand, best known for its open-ear listening experience, powered by patented best-in-class bone conduction technology. Aftershocks headphones sit outside your ear so you can hear your music and your surroundings. I know. Aftershocks is a must-have for runners, providing the ultimate level of safety and comfort without compromising sound quality. To learn more and save $50 on Aftershocks endurance bundles, visit tina.aftershocks.com. That's tina.aftershokz.com. Ray, I am so excited to have you here on the Running For Real podcast. This has been a long time coming, and I can't even remember who introduced us years ago. I think it might have been Mark Cucuzella, but either way, I'm so thankful to him or them, whoever it was, right now for introducing me to you, for allowing me to get to know you, and allowing everyone else to get to know you today. So thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to spend time with you, Tina.
Yeah, this is going to be really fun. And actually, so I already knew you own a practice in Portland, Oregon, Northwest Foot and Ankle. I'm not sure if you do know, though, my brother-in-law lives in Portland. So I do visit from time to time. I didn't realize where it was until I was researching. But I did not know. So you offer natural foot health services there. I did not know, however, that what you had done in your own running career, which is quite impressive, finishing 14th in the US National Men's Cross Country Championships. And you ran 13:56 in the 5K, which was nearly Olympic trials qualifying, and very impressive time. I'm sure most people listening are just kind of jaws on the ground right now.
Thank you, Tina. Doesn't quite compare to your excellence.
I would say that's pretty, that's up there for sure. 13:56, very impressive, and 14th in national cross country champs. That's great. So, do you feel like that experience as a runner has helped you to be a better doctor? Kind of because you get it with runners just how important their running is, and especially when it comes to things not working as they should be, we get a bit frustrated. Do you feel like that's helped you a lot?
I definitely believe so. In fact, I primarily see runners, Tina, because I do think I understand the mentality. You said something in your book, in the portion that I've read, about switching up a few things. And one of the things that was recommended to you was to do less running. Mm-hmm. And you weren't real happy about that. And I understand that. And the last thing I want to do is take runners out of their sport. I want to help them stay in the sport and get better. It's really compelling to see how many athletes, runners in particular, are told to stop running. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about because they've got a stress fracture or torn tendon. They're just, running's hard on your body and it's going to...
Like Achilles tendonitis or something.
Wow. And I don't need to tell you, we're living in a very overweight world, very unhealthy, people are weak. So I really relish the opportunity of keeping people moving. But undoubtedly, my own running experience plays into being able to understand injury. Mm-hmm. I remember some of my injuries in college that took me out for 6 and 8 weeks at a time, and it had a profound effect on my whole being. You know, I know I also don't need to tell you as a runner, if you don't run, you're not happy, So I totally get it. And I think being a runner and particularly having a lot of injuries over the years helps me to empathize with where folks are at. But I also feel quite confident that with a lot of the injuries that are coming in don't need people to stop running. We just need to tweak a few things. So undoubtedly, yes, being a runner helps me to speak their language. And
related to that, so you mentioned, just as I'm sure this is something people are wondering about while we're passing this question, injuries that people should stop running. So let's say they're going to see someone who does say they should stop running. Which ones should you be stopping and resting for? You mentioned stress fracture. What else?
Definitely torn tendons or ligaments.
Okay.
Not super common, but occasionally people will tear their plantar fascia, or they'll tear their Achilles, or they'll tear their peroneal tendons. And if it's a minor tear, they'll probably have some pain and they'll know there's a problem. If it's a complete tear, they obviously won't be able to run and they shouldn't run. But it's interesting. Every couple of months, I will meet somebody who is an intelligent professional person who has a running injury that they need to stop, and they will not stop. So broken bones, torn tendons, torn ligaments. Obviously, if you're really, really sick too, and this isn't my work, and primary care or family medicine might give better guidelines in terms of when you have the flu or when you have a cold or something along those lines. But musculoskeletally, broken bones, torn tendons, torn ligaments, or if whatever injury the runner has is causing them to limp, I usually try to get them in the pool or get them on the bike because in my experience, many times if limping persists, it will create a new injury pattern that then sometimes supersedes why they started limping to begin with and might actually become a more significant issue. So limping is bad. Things that warm up while you're doing your warm up and feel fine during your training are probably fine to train through. For instance, a stress fracture, I don't know if you've ever had one, doesn't feel better when you warm it up. It hurts more. Mm-hmm. So that's a clue for your audience if they're trying to figure out if they've got something that might be, they're able to train through it. A bad sign is if they have increasing pain and it doesn't warm up. Obviously, black and blue is not a good sign. Usually black and blue always indicates something's torn or something's broken. Swelling, also a concerning sign. So obviously, if any of those things are going on, I would urge your athletes to get in and see somebody and just get it evaluated.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. And I'm glad you mentioned about the limping thing, because I think that's something that, as you know, it's difficult as a runner to accept that you are limping, but you know when you're doing it. And actually, you asked me if I've had a stress fracture. I haven't had a stress fracture, which is quite surprising given my story. But apparently my bones are somehow strong enough to handle that. But I did have one stress reaction, which was brought on because I got a blood blister on the ball of my foot, like the pad of my big toe. And I refused to take a few days off, even though I had a blood blister on my, from spikes I'd been wearing. And I started running funny. And sure enough, I ended up with a stress reaction from running awkwardly on my shins. Oh, maybe it was one of the lower leg bones. I can't even remember which one. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is important. And that always sticks in my mind because there's such a clear correlation between the two things happening. So thank you for mentioning that. Now, with your practice, Northwest Foot and Ankle, you practice natural foot health services, if you want to say that. What does that mean for someone listening who might not know?
Yeah. The way I describe it to folks is it requires a little bit of a discussion about the different branches of medicine. Mm-hmm. So typically when we talk about going to the doctor, we're talking about going to an allopathic doctor, an MD doctor.
Yep.
And if people are familiar with the training for that type of a degree and the treatments, it doesn't take into consideration prevention or natural functioning of the body. What it attempts to do is to quell the symptoms. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't familiar with naturopathy or osteopathy or chiropractic or any of these other branches of medicine before I went into podiatry. So I didn't realize that podiatry, at least in America, is an allopathic profession. So what that means is I was not trained to understand what a natural foot looks like, nor what a natural foot functions like. I was trained to be familiar with the diseases that occur in Americans' feet, largely because of footwear.
What would be some examples of that?
Bunions, hammer toes, heel pain. Okay. People have heard the term plantar fasciitis. We don't use that term anymore. We use the term fasciosis because it's not an inflammatory problem. It's actually a dead tissue problem. Those would be common ones, but I would say the difference between the way I was trained versus the way I practice now is I was trained to give medicines, give shots, do surgeries, make orthotics.
I was going to say that's got to be a big part of this, right?
Yeah. And by the way, Tina, as you probably are well aware, sometimes people do need those strategies. But what I found lacking, because of some of my own suffering, there's not a lot of prevention and there's not a lot of consideration of the cause. The consideration is given to where does this person hurt? What is their diagnosis? What treatment can we give them to make the pain go away? That can include cutting somebody's nerve. That could include a potent medicine that knocks out their immune system. So what naturopathy or natural foot care really is observing the natural human foot in its untainted state, which your audience members are not largely going to be familiar with. I had to go to Africa and South America and Asia, and I had to read some non-mainstream literature to understand. The way I describe it to people in America is I show my daughter's footprints. I've got two beautiful daughters, 15 and 13. But as your daughter got the birth certificate in the hospital where they probably stamped her baby foot in ink on the paper, in 25 years of looking at feet, I've only ever once seen a baby's foot that was not naturally perfectly shaped, which is widest at the tips of the toes. So when I discuss to people that they're in my office because they changed the form of their feet, which now is changing the function of their feet and leading to disability and disease and injury. I try to help them understand that our goal is not just to make their pain go away. Our goal is to help them identify why they got the pain to begin with. Because in my early career, Tina, I didn't practice this way. I practiced traditional podiatry. And I operated on people and I did all these things. And too often they kept coming back. And I know you and I have spoken about bunions in the past. One of the stark realities about the early bunion operations that I did, many of those people came back and saw me in 8 or 9 years, and they took their shoe off and their bunion was back.
Wow.
And when this first started occurring, I didn't quite know what to make of it until I read some articles by a doctor by the name of William Rossi. And for your audience members, they're on our website. There's 4 of them. We paid copyright privileges. You can link to them. You can reproduce them. First one was Why Shoes Make Normal Gait Impossible. And I read this in Podiatry Management Magazine in 1999. And if you read the article, Tina, you'll understand why I changed my practice. I realized nobody taught me how feet are supposed to function except this one man. And although this one man was a podiatrist, nobody paid attention to him in podiatry. He died at age 90-something. Every year, he would write a letter to all of the podiatry colleges and ask them if they're ever going to include any natural foot health curriculum. So for your audience, natural foot health aims to prevent things before they happen, and that occurs through education. And the problem with medical system, at least where I'm at, is we all seem to be too busy treating diseases and pathology to slow down, take the time, explain to people what's going on, why they got there. So what people do is they get treatment, Tina, and they don't address the cause, and they get the problem again at a later date. So that's the stark difference. We're trying to figure out why they got it first and foremost, so that if we decide to treat them, we are also making sure that once their treatment is complete, the problem doesn't come back. However, you might not be surprised to find out that very people in our clinic get treated. We spend an hour talking to these folks about what you and I will talk about this evening, and they're mostly athletic. They want to run. Fashion is a secondary issue for them most of the time, so they do the right thing. Their body gets better. They not only stay out of my office, they set PRs. I see them on the trail. I see them at the race. I don't see them in my office talking about what I saw them for 3 months ago, and they want another shot or they want more medicine. So it's a very good way to treat people, but it's also a radical departure from the way medicine is delivered, podiatric medicine is delivered in America. And I hope to change that, or at least I hope to influence folks in my career. I find some of the younger podiatrists are interested in our work, but quite frankly, my 2 associate doctors are naturopathic doctors.
That's good.
If you were to understand the curriculum in naturopathy, one of their basic principles is to find the cause. I never heard word 1 about finding the cause in 4 years of podiatry school. Not once. I heard about how to classify archetypes and make orthotics and learn about medicines. And again, I don't want to downplay the value of that when people do need that. But overwhelmingly, people need education and prevention first. And it's a perfect marriage if you do it that way, but it's not happening that way. It's happening in backwards fashion. So that's what we're trying to do. We mostly talk to people and mostly teach them about footwear, and we get them into proper footwear. None of them know what their foot shape is supposed to be like. All of them are wearing shoes too small. All of them are wearing shoes that aren't the shape of a natural human foot. So just that step alone, when we reverse that, it takes a while, as you can imagine.
Well, as I also know.
Yes. When the minimal shoes got really popular a while back, people made a lot of mistakes with the minimal shoes, which caused a lot of people to depart from recommending them and caused Vibram Five Fingers to get sued and so forth. That's the other obstacle to this kind of work. It's not you're feeling better by tomorrow. Now, it's not like you get a shot and you go do your workout tomorrow. This is lifestyle medicine. It's stuff that you need to bring about slowly on a daily basis. And for a lot of athletes, even young athletes, this takes upwards of a year for their body to start finally figuring out what it's really supposed to do.
Well, thank you for explaining that. And, I'm glad that you kind of went into all the different areas and where you began as well. So it's not, I'm sure you experienced this, the danger with starting with naturopathy is people kind of zone out and think, oh, yeah, that kind of woo-woo stuff. But this isn't that. And this is something that I have really, really bought into and believe in. And Dr. Mark Cucuzella, I think it was him who introduced me to you. And he had been talking about it for years, and it took me a while to kind of get it into my head. But now I have been kind of playing into that. And I know many of my audience have noticed that I have switched to ultras for a lot of my running. And a lot of that is because the shoe shape is more of the natural foot shape. And that's, I have noticed now that a lot of other shoes that I used to wear all the time, they just don't feel good at all. And I like to see that as a compliment. Although, so leading on from that, one thing that I find interesting, I want to hear from you. You mentioned the cause. What are some causes? But before we get onto that, you mentioned Bailey, my daughter, her foot shape. And I had noticed that. But I also noticed that shoes they provide for her age, which she has like the smallest size possible. So that might be part of it. But they are wide. They are the shape of a child's foot. So when does it switch to, does it just over the years get narrower, or like when does this kind of like, okay, well now they're, old enough to handle an adult shaped foot? Like when does this transition occur?
Yeah, usually around age 2 or 3.
Oh, really? That young?
Yeah.
They go narrow?
Yeah.
And is that fashion, or is that just, is there a reason for that?
It's largely fashion and a little bit of ignorance too, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, your point is very valuable for your audience, Tina. In fact, folks that come to visit us, I show the baby footprint. Then I pull out my own baby shoes, which to your point are widest at the ends of the toes. But I mentioned to them that shortly thereafter, we begin measuring people's feet with something called a Brannick device.
Okay.
This metal measuring device that you see in the store.
Yeah.
What most people don't understand is that device is designed to fit people in fashion footwear, which is widest at the ball. Nobody considers their high heel dress shoes to be healthful. I mean, everybody knows it's to make a statement, to look good, to have a matching outfit and so forth. So it starts really early, Tina. And it's really sad for your audience members who are parents. I've got a video on the website about children's footwear. It's probably 5 minutes long, and we talk about what you and I are talking about right now. And we start comparing models that are available for 2 and 3-year-old kids. They start becoming heavier, thicker, stiffer, adding heels. Most negative is they begin pinching the toes into that tapered toe box shape. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating, Tina, is it doesn't hurt. Most kids aren't going to say, Mommy, my shoes hurt. It's largely a painless deformation.
Isn't it kind of like, I don't know, now I'm saying this, the Chinese, they used to wrap their feet.
It's exactly like that, but for a different reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly that. But like I said, the kids don't complain. The little kids in China, they were breaking their bones and reshaping the foot. And most Americans don't really understand what that's for either. It wasn't for fashion. And I suppose you've been very open and transparent in your book, so I'm just going to lay it out there. We're all friends here. The breaking of that foot was not to make it into a dainty, ornamental, aesthetically attractive foot, as most Americans believe it to be, including myself until I read a book called Bound Feet and Western Dress a few years ago. Okay. It's about creating a surrogate sexual organ out of the woman's foot. I was blown away by that. And that makes sense because there's nothing beautiful about that crushed foot. It's horrible looking.
Yeah.
And the one picture that will never leave my mind was of one of the oldest survivors who went through that when she was a girl. They outlawed that in 1964, so it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Thankfully. But one of the last remaining survivors, in a very telling photograph, had her son under one shoulder and was holding onto a cane on the other arm, because these people cannot walk on their feet.
Yeah, I remember reading that, yeah.
They're destroyed. They're literally destroyed. And then there's also the comment that some people believe it might have something to do with keeping them captive. They're not going to go anywhere because they can't.
Wow.
But it is a lesser version of that for a different reason. Ours truly is for an aesthetic reason. And this starts early. Children have peer pressure. My 13 and 15-year-old daughters tell me about it all the time. I want them to be healthy, but they also realize that most of what their friends wear, because it's a cool brand or it looks good, is harming them. So it starts early. It's largely painless. And somebody did a fascinating study where they went to Africa and they took a bunch of adolescent kids who had perfect feet, whitest at the tips of the toes, and they put Western shoes on them, and they deformed their feet on purpose, and it didn't hurt them. So it's a painless process. Yeah. In fact, this is one of the fascinating realities about my work, and I'm eager to share it with you and your audience. My typical patient is a fourth decade female runner who has one foot that won't function properly. She's probably tried a whole bunch of stuff. It's not getting better. And invariably, she will look at me and say, why now? And why just one foot? She won't have overtrained. She won't have had trauma. She didn't drop something on her foot, didn't sprain her ankle. She's just all of a sudden one foot. And I think that's a reflection of what we're talking about here. Our feet, because they have, believe it or not, our feet contain a quarter of all of our body's bones.
Oh, wow.
52. So a quarter of all the bones in our body. And if you look at the foot, it's got all these uniquely shaped joints, which can adapt to all kinds of ranges of motion. So our feet literally will put up with us abusing them and putting them in unnatural positions for decades. And this is what leads people to believe that their pointed running shoe is okay. Mm-hmm. I ran some fast races in pointed running shoes. I was hurt a lot. I was taking a lot of Advil, getting cortisone shots and so forth. So the point is, we don't know what we're doing to ourselves until it finally breaks. And an interesting thing happens then, and you just touched on it, which is we turn those people around, those women, we get them into ultras, we spread their toes, we get them strong. We talk about training and nutrition and sleeping and breathing and all that. They get well, they get back to the sport, and then when they come in for follow-up, they say what you said a moment ago, which is they can't wear their shoes anymore. They literally can't wear their old pointed running shoes. They can't wear their Dance Co clogs that they used to wear to work that they told them were healthy. And they're all puzzled. We talk about this every day, and they're puzzled at that. And the way I describe it to them is at about age 2 or 3, we remove their awareness. So because of what we do to feet, we're not propriocepting properly. We're not gathering good information from the ground. So we're not moving as well as we should, but we still can do well for a time. And that's what leads people into a false sense of, my shoes are fine, everything's fine. I almost wish it happened earlier in life so people would pay attention to these things sooner, because at a certain point, I might meet people that they've gone so far down the wrong path that it's either a long road back, or maybe the road back does require surgery or medicine. So the quicker we can get to people and teach them primarily about their shoes, that's step one, which is not taught in podiatry. Going back to the earliest question you asked about the difference between naturopathic podiatry and traditional podiatry. In traditional podiatry, I'm taught to put the patient in the treatment table, do the exam, make the diagnosis, formulate the treatment plan. Nowadays, we talk about shoes first. We show the baby footprint. The next thing we do is we have that person put their foot on top of the sock liner that comes out of their shoe. And this is eye-opener number 2 for 90% of our runners. We take a picture of all of them, and we're going to publish this shortly, because 90% of all of our runners, when they stand on the sock liner of their running shoe, their foot is wider than the sock liner.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
So if your audience is following us, what that means is, since the sock liner is the shape of the upper of the shoe will actively try to deform your foot to the shape of the sock liner, which is not good. So here's where going to Ultra, going to some of the other brands
tell us some other ones. I mean, Ultra is the only one I have tried, but what are some other ones?
Yeah, Ultra is great. Topo is great. Lems. And by the way, this is all on the website. If you want to publish our shoe review or shoe list, you can. Lems, Ahimsa, Be Real, Vibram 5 Fingers, Soft Star shoes. There's so many good options out there now, Tina, and more coming out all the time. A funny little tidbit, when I first started this work in, 1998, 99, I would have this conversation with the patients, telling them that I feel like we should take a different direction in our approach to their injuries. And it makes sense to everybody. It's our natural anatomy. It's not a philosophy. It's not a theory. It's not how I personally think. It's been written about in the medical literature for over 100 years. It doesn't belong to me. But the reality is, people don't really realize what the foot shape should be like. They don't realize that what they're doing to themselves each and every day is actively deforming themselves. So basically, we just try to backtrack and get them aware of that and get them on the right path, and they heal.
Yeah, and I've loved kind of reading some of the people who have been to you, seen other people who work in a similar field to you, and seeing the differences it can make. So, and we are going to talk later about how you do actually offer remote consultations as well. So this isn't just for people in Portland, Oregon. But anyway, moving on with that, I just want to say one more thing to the listeners. I remember when I was first kind of alerted to these, what at the time I was calling like wider shoes, but really they're just like we've been talking about how our feet should be. And I remember looking at them and thinking, oh my God, like I cannot wear these things. Steve bought in immediately. He's been wearing these shoes for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years now. And I just would look at them and I thought, no chance in hell am I wearing those things. But they've come such a long way, and they do. You can almost not tell with a lot of the shoes now. Again, the only one I have tried is Ultra. I'm not sponsored by Ultra. I just they are ones I have tried and liked. And then there's another one that we've tried, which I'll just mention this as I know people appreciate my opinions. Is it Olukai?
Yeah.
How do you say that? I'm not even sure. Olukai. They have like more casual shoes that Steve and I both enjoy. So those are the two I will mention because they're the ones that I know. But I'm glad you gave a list there, and you can go check out the website. But they have come a long way. So don't write this off immediately, and just think of all the benefits that you could be getting here from making a difference. Anything to add before we kind of move on?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. So moving on from that, another thing that you have yourself come up with is something that has been the game changer for me, even more than the shoes initially. And again, my husband, Steve, bought into this. I think you sent us 2 pairs, probably, 3 years ago now. And Steve wears it all day, every day. He runs in them. He sometimes runs barefoot in them. He absolutely loves them. And I've put a lot of photos of me on social media using them, and people always say, what the heck is that? But to start off with, before we start talking about correct toes, I put a picture up last week of myself wearing them, saying I was talking to you. And my sister responded saying, are you trying to give yourself webbed feet for when there's a big flood or something? Like, she made a joke, obviously, but that's probably the kind of response that we're going to get from people here, because this is it's natural, but it's also not what people expect. And, I kind of got defensive to my sister, like, no, this is how your feet are supposed to be, actually. But so firstly, I wanted to mention that. And I'm assuming you get a lot of responses kind of like that, because it's just so different to what people are used to seeing.
Yeah, going back to what we touched on a moment ago, your response, no way in hell would you wear a shoe like that. We've learned that we have to screen our athletes before we allow them to come to the clinic, because if they're not willing to wear something like that, we can't help them.
Yeah.
The cornerstone of natural foot health is the footwear, and we layer on top of that. So when these particularly professional women would come in and we would describe the problem, and we'd tell them the natural path to healing, and it seemed interesting to them. A lot of them had already done traditional care and maybe didn't get well. But then when we'd show them the shoe, and to your point, they have gotten a lot better for sure, but we'd show them the shoe, and I remember many of them saying what you said, Tina, I wouldn't wear that for anything. And to your sister's point too, we get a lot of jokes around here, duck feet, clown feet, web feet. Well, I tell people natural human feet too. Yes. And you adequately stated it. That is how we are supposed to be. But because of what we cover in the outset of the podcast, We don't know that because we've changed people by the time they're 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. We look at each other, our feet look the same, which is like shoes. And so it's really lost on us that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Podiatry community is not actively teaching this. Podiatry community accepts lots and lots of sponsorship money from companies that sell pointed-toed running shoes. So if you're going to continue with that kind of footwear, you're going to want traditional podiatry.
Yep.
If you can see your way clear to doing what you've done wisely, and I hope your audience members will, your body will thank you. But yeah, you will have to overcome not only in some cases your own personal aversion. People who are sensitive to how other people perceive them oftentimes come in and tell us they're very uncomfortable. Everybody's noticing their shoes and so forth. I get it, and I personally don't care. I just want to be comfortable in my body. Mm-hmm. But when I climb on the elevator, I can see people giving me like the double glance, because I wear shoes that look unusual to them, But the beautiful thing is, if people are willing and able to take this step, they can avoid a lot of injuries and a lot of expense for medical treatment. And I know I wouldn't have to convince you of this. There's nothing more beautiful than being healthy in your running body and just enjoying your running.
Absolutely.
And I've been a runner my whole life, Tina. I've tried everything. I've read everything. And it's fun to keep learning, and keep getting better. But I would have to say foot health is a piece that I think the running community still needs to catch up a lot on. It's getting a little bit better. People are starting to talk about strengthening. People are starting to challenge widespread lifelong use of orthotics. But I still think we need to keep going further. So good job educating the community, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, no, I'm happy to. And I'm educating my family as well, apparently. But okay, so I started on correct toes. So you've created these correct toes. I've put plenty of pictures of me on my social media using them. So people, you should have seen them by now. Tell us what they are, how you came up with it and just kind of the process for that.
So when I read Dr. Rossi's work in 1999, it was the first anybody had ever taught me the concept that our toes should be the widest part of our feet. And at that time, I had what is known as an overlapping toe, which is a hammer toe that sits on top of a bunion. So, and this was going on both of my feet. I wore size 9 racers and trainers. I'm a size 12, so I wore them way too small. What was
the reason for that for you?
Nobody taught me.
So was that you just didn't get sized, or like you just, because flat spikes are normally, or racing shoes are normally a bit smaller just in general?
I think maybe, people's feet get bigger as we get older, and that's something else people don't hear about. But I think not only maybe I got measured too small, I continued to choose the same size of shoe over and over for 20 some years. And it was always too small. So not so surprisingly, my feet became shaped like my spikes. And one of my good massage therapy buddies here locally, good national class runner, mostly treats runners, said to me one day, he was working on his athletes and he happened to notice that their feet were shaped exactly like their shoes. And this is what's going on for all of us, and it's not an insignificant thing. So interestingly, I was learning to do surgery at the time, and anybody in the audience who's had a bunion worked on, there's a lot that goes into it. There's cutting bones, there's putting plates and pins and screws. But the one part of the operation that bothered me that I did not want to have was when we do that operation, we cut the adductor hallucis muscle off of the big toe. And I remember doing that hundreds of times and watching that, and something didn't sit right with me about that. So I started talking to my physical therapy friends about what if it's possible for us to stretch that muscle as opposed to having to cut it off the bone? And so I had some patients in the nursing home one night. So did my physical therapy friend. He had a lady that fell and broke her hip. She laid in her hospital bed, her rehab bed, so long that she got stiff and contracted, even her upper body. She lost some range of motion. So he would methodically warm up her body and just work the range of motion, and he got most of it back. And I remember thinking, and I even asked him and some other physical therapists, is there any way that we can do a similar rehab process in the small muscles of the foot? And so that's what launched the idea of maybe I'm going to use my own body as a guinea pig. I don't want this operation. So I started putting single silicone splints between my big toe and my second toe.
I was envisioning you using those things from the nail salon, when people get pedicures, like walking around your house with that.
I've done some of that too. Yeah. So the silicone worked pretty good. So I started putting it between my fourth and fifth toe. And I noticed that I got a space between my big toe and second toe. All of my podiatry colleagues told me that could never happen. And by the way, for your audience members, if they have a bunion, we should probably talk about what that really is and maybe what they're being told and what might and might not be true. So essentially, a bunion is a progressive dislocation of the big toe joint caused by footwear. And once Dr. Rossi taught me that, I saw my way clear to getting the footwear away from my big toe so it could come out from under my second toe, which it did. My foot is shaped like a baby foot today, Tina, both of them. Incredibly strong. I can run whenever I want. I haven't had a true injury in about 10 years. I get little things, but I was chronically injured early on when I wore the wrong kind of shoes and so forth. So I started telling the patients about it. It made sense. So they said they wanted to try it. The problem we touched on a moment ago was at that time there was no Ultra, there was no Topo, no Lems. There was Crocs and Birkenstocks were the only foot-shaped shoes in the marketplace. So we ran races in Crocs. I ran my marathon PR in Crocs.
You ran a marathon in Crocs?
Crocs, yeah. Wow. But here's the freaky thing, Tina. I felt good enough to run the next day, which I'd never felt before. So all of my previous marathons, I would take some time off, and just eat and rest and ask myself why in the heck I did that. And I'm never doing that again. But something about positioning my body the way natural footwear does, I covered the 26 miles comfortably and it didn't beat me up like it used to. So I see a lot of people out there hurting themselves and putting themselves through races in unnatural positions and developing injuries and not running as fast as they should, not running as comfortable as they should. So the problem there, though, Tina, was the single silicone spacers would not stay in place. As soon as your foot sweat, they'd move around. So I talked to a designer buddy of mine and I said, let's make a one piece that spreads all the toes, that is adjustable between the big toe and second toe and fourth and fifth toe, because somebody who has a bunion would like to progressively move their big toe back. We never want to suddenly move it back because that hurts people. So the nature of the device is to help an adult runner who has developed a shoe-shaped foot get their foot back to the natural foot shape that we're supposed to have, which, again, for your audience, this might be new information for them. The widest, healthiest part should be the ends of the toes. And to that point, your audience members are likely not going to want to use the old measuring system of the metal measuring device. I encourage people to never, ever use a number and a letter when they fit their footwear, because shoes are made all over the world. That's
true, yeah. Just like clothes vary widely as well.
Same thing. So the sock liner test, and we've got a video on that, is a much better way of going about that. And all of this needs to be brought about on a slow, gradual basis. And if people can do it that way, our bodies will go back to that natural state. And when they do, some really wonderful things happen. Most notably, I see people less in the clinic for injury.
And that's, obviously the goal here. And it's good to know that it can be done. And a lot of it is these are going to be things you can do at home, as you mentioned, doing it slowly, though. So for someone who is listening to this thinking, okay, I'm in, I trust you. I believe what you're saying here. They want to kind of move to the foot shaped shoes, and they've got themselves some of those. They're transitioning. They want to get themselves a pair of correct toes. What is kind of a timeline you would suggest for someone who has been running, let's say, 5 to 10 years, but wearing shoe-shaped shoes their whole life?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple variables that play into that decision. And one of them is the one that you just mentioned, how long they've been running. So that's one variable. Another very important variable is how much soft tissue flexibility do they have in their feet.
Okay.
I will occasionally meet somebody who's been running for 50 years or so. They might be in their 6th or 7th decade, and they've waited so long and they've worn shoe-shaped shoes for so long that when I try to move their foot back into its natural state, it doesn't want to go. And a person like that, obviously, they're going to take a lot longer if they can even make the change. Some of those people, if their toes won't move, they need an operation. And this won't work for them. They'll use this post-operatively. But the factors that we use to weigh in on that are how long they've been running, what's their soft tissue flexibility, how willing are they to make the footwear change. And that doesn't just include running. I should tell you, I've got two groups of female runners in the practice. I've got the professional ladies that are bankers and lawyers, and they either have a dress code at work that requires them to wear fashion footwear, or they themselves feel uncomfortable in their career choice wearing ultra to work with a dress. So a lot of those ladies will wear their fashion footwear during the day, but then they'll go home at night, they'll get their correct toes, they'll do their workout in something like an ultra, they'll do their rehab, and they probably don't get worse as quickly as they would if they didn't do that stuff, but they also don't get better as quickly as the ladies that look at me and they say, my body is way too important. Mm-hmm. I don't care what anybody thinks about what I look like. I don't care if those shoes don't go with the outfit. All I want to do is take care of my body. So they go to work in shoes that are shaped like their feet and suffer the social insults and the people staring at them. But they also are healthier, more comfortable in their body, less injured, see me a lot less, get a lot less medical treatment. So it really does come down to the personal choice. Mm-hmm. And obviously, maybe because I'm a male, it might have something to do with it. But my desire for people would be that they would put their health first, mm-hmm. Because if you could be a fly on my wall, or some of your audience members could hear the suffering and the stories of pain that people bring in while they're weeping about how this injury has taken them out of running, destroyed their life, and they've had all these ineffective treatments, it's really worthwhile pursuing it, especially if you could do it in an inexpensive, natural, non-painful way. Yeah,
definitely. I totally agree. I do think it is more difficult for a woman, just primarily because and I noticed this with the shoes Steve was wearing when he started transitioning. I was a little bit like, okay, well, that's great. Those kind of look sort of like men's, casual shoes. But for a woman that, I do think it is a bit more difficult. I see that a lot with people who work as nurses or people who want to wear comfortable casual shoes but have long shifts. I haven't really looked recently because I do work from home. So thankfully I don't have to look into that. But there weren't before many options that I would say wouldn't get too many people kind of staring. Whereas men, I feel like a lot of the shoes Steve has worn, I don't think most people would notice. And in England, people are a lot more aware of fashion. But I don't feel like my friends at home have noticed that Steve's shoes are any different. So I do think it's more difficult for women. But I also agree with you that you can kind of take it to two levels. You could do a bit of both if you like, or you can, if you're ready to take that step, you can kind of say, whatever, I don't care what people think of me. I care about my health. And I will just say to anyone who is kind of going through the transition time, just in general, one thing I did notice with the shoes in particular, partially because I think it's zero drop, but also partially because my body is kind of in a transition stage. I did find that I ended up quite a lot more sore, a bit more beaten up in my legs some of the time, particularly on long runs. So I will just warn people that you may find yourself feeling a bit more tired. People will notice, or did notice on my Strava, that I'd been complaining about sore, heavy legs quite a lot in my training. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of that probably was kind of my body adjusting to this new running shoe that wasn't so cushiony and the shape was completely different. So do you think that was the case?
I do.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Good to know.
That's very common.
Just for anyone who's going to do that. One more thing to do with this. You mentioned about someone who's 60 or 70 who comes in and has been running for 50 years. In that example, were you just using someone who had been dealing with some major pain and was just kind of at the end of their rope coming into you? Or are you kind of saying, just for a lot of our listeners who may be masters athletes, and thinking, well, I'm too old, so what's the point? What would you say to that?
I would say never too old. I have 8th and 9th decade running patients that still win their age group, and we still keep them going. So I don't think it's ever too late to bring about some of these positive changes. However, as I mentioned earlier, some folks listening are probably going to have, say, maybe a big toe joint that has arthritis, and it doesn't have the ability to move away from the second toe. Unless somebody establishes the ability, and usually that's an operation, they're not going to be able to do this program. And if their big toe is fused and it's stuck with arthritis, nothing's going to be able to push it over. However, if you've got some older audience members who are listening right now and have toe mobility, this can be a life changer.
Yeah.
And I am not a salesperson. I'm not about trying to get rich selling the silicone separator, but I listen to people telling me their life experiences and how things change. And obviously mine did as well. So it's worth doing. Even if you don't do it 100% of the time, it's worth doing. But as we both agreed a moment ago, if people start down this path, some positive things start to happen that then will cause them to probably want to go further down the path. And one of those primary things, like I mentioned, is they're not going to want to wear their old shoes anymore. And we hear about this all the time. And people are grieving because they've invested a ton of money. And some of my female patients tell me they save a few pairs and they just leave them in their closet and stare at them once in a while, but they don't actually wear them. But I think if people have the mobility, I would urge anybody and everybody listening to at least evaluate your footwear. And your audience members are probably no different than the people that come in to see me, Tina. They're 90% of them probably have footwear that's changing their feet. So honestly, another positive thing can happen for younger people. We had a gentleman that came to our practice, a pure barefoot runner. And he came to our practice and he had a little bit of a bunion. And he did a time-lapse video of his feet over the course of a little over a year. And he didn't wear correct toes, but he'd stopped wearing pointed shoes. And his feet went back naturally without correct toes. So that's another thing that happens around here in the summertime. People wear less enclosed shoes. And their big toes start to try to go back. So this is what everybody listening wants to be thinking about and starting to implement, and they will not be disappointed, especially if they can take it slowly. And if any of it's confusing, we've tried to make it really clear on the website with the videos. I think we have 90 videos now. So if your audience members want to dig deeper into some of this, they can certainly educate themselves. And quite frankly, Tina, as much as we are happy to do peripheral consultations with people, our ultimate goal for our work is for people to see our videos, read the work and the medical literature, understand their footwear, get different footwear, start doing the rehab, maybe buy correct toes, and heal themselves. The people I want to talk to and the people I want to see here are not people that just need to change their shoes and get stronger. I want to see the true complex cases, real deformity. But you know what, Tina? They're rare.
I'm sure.
Most people don't need aggressive stuff. Most people need what you and I are talking about. So if your audience members can just get on the website, look at some of the videos, just about every foot condition that would go to a podiatry office has a natural video associated with it. Okay.
Well, definitely, listeners, you can go check those out because I know many of you have foot issues and have asked about this particularly. So go check out the Northwest Foot and Ankle website, and it's NW. Oh, I can't remember what it is. What is the website again?
Yeah, we have two of them, nwfootankle.com, and the other one is correcttoes.com.
Okay, yeah. I knew there was the correct toes one. Okay. And one more thing, you mentioned bunions. Is there anything else you'd like to say about bunions?
Yes. We're currently in an active debate with some Harvard researchers because bunions are one of the most poorly understood and easily miseducated topics. There's a study going on out in Boston called the Framingham study, and it's 85,000, it might be postal workers or it might be nurses, I can't remember. But they've been following them for many years, trying to find out who's going to get cancer, who's going to get diabetes, who's going to get heart disease, strokes, et cetera. Recently, they've been looking at musculoskeletal ailments like limb length inequality, arthritis, and recently they looked at bunions and digital deformity. So that would be hammer toes and clawed toes and curly toes. But what they did is they identified 2,700 people within that 85,000 group who had bunions and crooked toes, like what I had. And they instructed those people to go back into their family history and interview family members to find out who else had bunions and who else had hammer toes. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, most of them did. So they concluded in their paper that bunions and hammer toes are highly hereditable. But what they didn't do is what you and I are talking about here. They didn't have their study subjects stand on the sock liner of their footwear, or they would realize that 100% of people that develop bunions have been wearing footwear that's narrower than their foot and not the shape of their foot their entire life. And so in our dialogue, I urge them to check that, and they'll realize their results are in error. And this is a very important topic because many, many millions of dollars are spent on elective foot surgery, and it doesn't always work out. And a lot of those people go right back into the same shoes because nobody addressed their cause. They told them it runs in their family and that surgery is the only thing that can be done. That's not true. If that were true, I would not have been able to reverse my own bunion. And your audience members would not be able to go on our website and read the hundreds of testimonials with visuals, photographs, x-rays. And that's the highest level of scientific scrutiny, is if you can prove with a visual, which we've been doing now for years. So people are still resistant to believe that. My community still teaches our residents to be surgeons, and they don't get taught this. So there's really a lot of misinformation about what causes these things. And unfortunately, because of that misinformation, people end up undergoing treatments that they probably shouldn't. And I'll give you an example. A lot of people that come in will have a bunion on both feet. And if the surgeon does both feet at the same time, they'll have both operations. If the surgeon does one at a time, about 90% of them will not go back for that second operation. It's not a small deal, It's a swelling, a lot of pain, and you've got hardware in your foot. And quite frankly, for your audience members, it's essentially a cosmetic procedure which narrows the foot so that it can fit into shoe-shaped shoes. Yes, so let me layer in one more beautiful truth. And by the way, for the audience members, we just completed our 3-part hereditary bunion myth series and an accompanying video. But what we told the Harvard researchers was, if we use the same methodology that they used to come to their conclusion, then we could simultaneously go over to Thailand, where the women wear brass rings on their necks and they lengthen out their necks. And we would say long-necked females, it's highly hereditable.
Yeah.
Same with these African tribes that bandage their soft skulls and grow these cone skulls. Similarly, we would say, well, cone-shaped skulls are highly hereditable in that African tribe. Well, the prudent person would obviously recognize there's an external deforming force. But literally, as absurd as this probably sounds to you and your audience members, podiatry ignores the deforming force. And will not go so far as to admit that shoes cause bunions. They might say things like, well, it might contribute to, it might enhance, it might further or perpetuate. That's absolutely false. Bunions are caused by footwear.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. And just to clarify, so those people you mentioned in Thailand and actually, I don't know about Thailand if they wear shoes or not. I've never been there, or not that I've been to Africa either, but you mentioned that specifically. Thailand and Africa, their feet are foot-shaped feet, correct?
Yeah. I spent some growing up years in Liberia, and my friends didn't have shoes. And we liked to play soccer, and I, of course, had shoes because I couldn't walk on the rocks, and they were sprinting across the rocks. But I still have pictures of all of my friends and their feet. The old people in Africa have a baby-shaped foot. A couple of years back, a helicopter flew over a tribe somewhere in South America that apparently still hasn't been reached by civilization, which shocked me. But the whole family was there: babies, adolescents, middle-aged, and then elderly. And they're all holding their spears, looking up at this helicopter, taking pictures of them. And somebody sent me the picture because every single one of them, including the senior grandfather, looked to be 70 or so, his big toe is shaped like a baby's big toe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's pretty compelling if you go throughout the world. And this is one of the fun things for me in my practice. People do travel throughout the world and they run races in places and they go on long hikes and they come back or they'll send me a postcard or a picture and they'll say, wow, look at this Sherpa climbing up the side of the Himalayas with a refrigerator on his back wearing flip-flops, and his feet are baby shaped or, so there's multiple examples around the world. And unfortunately for Americans, we don't pay attention to the baby foot shape. And many of us don't travel abroad. And like I said earlier, we look at each other's feet. And so we don't know what we're missing. But my gosh, Tina, if there's one message I really desperately want to get to people early is the footwear message.
Yeah.
It's so huge.
Thank you so much for explaining this. Just been such a topic I think is going to blow some people's minds, but just needed to be heard so badly. And if you don't believe me with this conversation, look at Amelia Boone. I know many of you are a huge fan of her. She has transitioned into foot-shaped shoes. She is an ultra athlete, and she also is always talking about her correct toes as well. So I know many of you are Amelia Boone fans, so go check her out as well. All right, we are just going to take a moment to thank our sponsor, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. You met my new sponsor at the beginning of the show, and I could not be more excited to be sponsored by Aftershocks for this episode. Now, full disclosure, I was totally skeptical of these. How are you supposed to hear your podcast or music when the actual headphone part is not in your ears? And what the heck does bone conduction technology even mean? Well, it means there are small transducers that rest in front of your ears, not inside or on your ears like most headphones, and they send these mini vibrations through your cheekbones to your inner ear, bypassing your eardrums. Wait, vibrations that go through my cheekbones? As someone who is prone to dizziness, this doesn't really sound like a recipe for fun. And I was expecting to hate them. And yes, my exaggerated hate is totally required in this way. But friends, let me just tell you, I was wrong. Totally and utterly wrong. I absolutely love them, not just for listening to podcasts or music during my runs and also just during the day, but I can actually have a phone call with my business coach while I'm being able to see and hear Bailey. They are so comfortable and lightweight, you honestly could forget you're wearing them. I even made the rookie error of wearing them for an hour and 40-minute run on my first try, and I barely noticed them at all. Obviously, other than the sound coming into my ears of the podcast I was listening to, which, by the way, it is so cool that you can actually hear cars coming or even birds chirping while at the same time listening to something and running. And my friends, the best part, you as a Running for Real listener can get $50 off a Trex Titanium Endurance Bundle at tina.aftershocks.com. That's tina.aftershokz.com. Go check it out. All right, Ray, just 4 more questions for you, starting with one piece of advice for life.
For life. Does this apply to running life or life?
It can be either or. You can choose.
Okay. Appreciate every day. Appreciate
I love that.
What good is in your life every day. Maybe I said another way, be grateful. Certainly that applies to running, but I think for me, it also applies to just everything.
So true. Yeah. An attitude of gratitude, right?
Yes.
Okay. One person to follow on social media and why?
Yeah, well, hopefully you're already following Dr. Mark Cuczela. That man is my hero. He's my absolute hero. I wasn't aware of everything he was involved in when I first met him. Oh my God, it's
insane.
I thought he was just geeked out about natural foot health. I thought that was his big deal. No. But then I find out he's in nutrition and he's teaching doctors how to cook and growing gardens and got
he's got a running store. He is a doctor. I've never known someone with so many things, hands in so many pots as him. And he's got a family. He's amazing.
And he's a wonderful human being, too.
Absolutely.
I've met a lot of accomplished people that aren't necessarily kind or aren't necessarily good around people, But Mark is my ideal man. For your audience members, Mark has what you might already be familiar with, the Natural Running Center.
Yep.
And on the front page of that website, Mark and a couple of others of us rewrote a 1905 paper talking about all this stuff. The actual paper's on our website, but the updated version that we all wrote together is on the front page of his site, Natural Running Center. So that would be it's free. It's an ebook.
I will put links on the show notes for that as well. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. As if I think we've kind of covered this one, but how would you like to be remembered on this show?
I would like to be remembered as a person that tries to get to the cause of the issue, tries to get to the root cause. I want people to not overlook that. And I want people to look more carefully at their footwear as health equipment, not just fashion symbols.
Yep. That is perfect. I love that. And I think that you definitely did a good job of doing that. And finally, what do you tell yourself when you or used to or do stand on the start line of a race?
Yeah. Well, these days I'm doing what you just started doing. And I'm not clear from your book yet whether or not you're going to go back to being elite or whether or not you're just
going to say, so spoiler alert.
So for me these days, when I race, I don't have my ego tied up in it, so I don't get nervous like I used to. But that was the thing I always hated about running was I couldn't handle my nerves, so I would lose my appetite. My stomach would just kill. My mouth would get dry. And I literally just couldn't wait for the race to start, and then you might imagine, or you might agree. And then the race is over and you're glad you went through it and maybe you had a good race but back then I would try to distract myself. I was just learning a little bit about breathing back then, which now I'm learning a ton about breathing. I wish I would have used it more back then. I think I could have calmed myself a lot better. But I tell myself to have fun. I tell myself that I'm going to be grateful that I get the opportunity to go to this starting line. And like I mentioned, my ego is no longer tied up, which it was for many years, and unhealthily so, Tina. At a point in my life, if I didn't have a good workout or I didn't have a good race, it literally affected everything else.
Oh, yeah. I think many of us recognize that. Yeah.
And to this day, even though I'm 52, I still have a guilt if I don't try to improve every day. And it's weird. I know I'm not going to the Olympics. I'm not getting faster.
You mean within running or in general?
Within running or within health, I should say. I feel like I need to get stronger, or I need to figure out something more about running, which is kind of cool because I do think we can continue to learn and grow as we get older. In fact, it's pretty interesting. If you were to look back at the runner I was at age 20 versus who I am now, I do about half of the things completely opposite I used to do.
But that's probably been for the better of your health and body overall, right? Because I'm sure many of those things were not the best idea.
They were not, yes.
Yes, but I'm glad you mentioned that. And you and I talked beforehand about we're both very much driven people who, are never really that happy with what we've done. And I know a lot of our listeners can attest to that as well and agree with that, because it's one of the traits of runners. But I'm glad that you've been able to kind of get to a point where you can enjoy your running and just, like you said, have fun with it. And I have too. And hopefully many more listening have got to that point as well. Okay, so if people want to find out more about you, we've mentioned you have the 2 websites, and I will put links in the show notes for those. But anything else that people can go follow you on?
Yeah, we just launched the Natural Foot Health Institute. And so we're going to be giving seminars throughout the country where we're going to credential people in natural foot health.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, so thank you. So people, hopefully we'll do it throughout the whole country so that people don't have to travel. We're doing our second one here in Portland, April 6th.
Okay.
But this would be this is for anybody, particularly for healthcare practitioners that might want to layer some of this into their work. But there's a glaring need for people to learn this stuff. Not a day goes by where somebody doesn't say, well, why doesn't my podiatrist do this? Or my sister's seeing somebody in Cincinnati, and is there somebody like you guys there? So that's what we want to do. We want to build a network of natural-minded people throughout the country, so the people that resonate with this can go find those practitioners. And so that's where people could also follow us this year as we launch seminars, and we would invite people to attend them. Whether they want to get accredited or not.
That is wonderful. Congratulations. How exciting. And I'm sure that's going to excite a lot of people listening as well, because then they'll be able to actually find someone near them that understands and gets it. So thank you so much for your wisdom and just for sharing this with us, this eye-opening stuff. And again, a personal thank you to you for all that you've done with me. And I know Steve is very thankful as well. And just keep up the good work. You truly are just doing an amazing job here of educating and just teaching us things that should be so obvious but aren't. So thank you for all that you do.
You're welcome. And thank you, Tina, for having me on your show.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. Am I right? Mind blown, right? Yeah, I'm kind of annoyed at myself for not setting this one up earlier, especially about many have asked about correct toes whenever I post about them. But hopefully it was worth the wait and you too can see that they can make a change in your life. And yes, you who is saying it is too late or you are too old, you are not. Go make those toes that work so hard for you be happy. Now, Ray has set up a coupon code for correct toes. If you use code TINAMUR, that's TINAMUIR, you will get free shipping with your correct toes. And he doesn't give out coupons very much. So this is really special. Go get yourself a pair right now. Now, remember, you can go to tinamuir.com/episode 103 to go fill out the survey to help make this podcast even better. You can also find a link through the show notes for everything we talked about today, including a link to my brand new sponsor, Aftershocks, which I am really excited about. They are absolutely wonderful and I just couldn't believe how much I enjoyed using them and I barely noticed they were there. In fact, I think I might even start wearing them just more often for days that I might need the extra kind of kick of motivation. They are just so lightweight. They are completely water resistant, just wonderful to use every day that you would want to listen to music or podcasts, which hopefully is definitely every Friday when you listen to this episode. But go visit Aftershocks to get yourself $50 off your bundle. So that would be at tina.aftershokz.com and you will get $50 off. Next week, we are going to be having an amazing episode with Justin Gallegos, who, if you will remember, is the first athlete with cerebral palsy who was given a professional contract by Nike, of all people. You may have seen that video go viral around the internet, and it was absolutely tear-jerking and just so emotional to see. And Justin is wonderful and just has such an amazing story. So be sure to go subscribe so you can get that to your phone or your podcast player right as it comes out next week. Have a wonderful week, my friends.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.